In this video, I'm going to explain all the force feedback settings in Project Motor Racing and how to best set up Project Motor Racing's force feedback. Not only that, I'm going to go through each setting and explain exactly what each setting does so that it doesn't matter what wheelbase that you're using, you can set the force feedback up exactly how you want it. Of course, if you want to be able to unsubscribe, you first have to subscribe first, so subscribe to unsubscribe. Click the like button if you find this kind of super boring setup video useful. And as always, a huge thank you to all our channel members, supporters, Patreon members that financially keep us here. Really appreciate it. Let's get on with the video. First thing to be aware of with Project Motor Racing, which is really confusing and not obvious, the game has two sets of force feedback options. One of them is in the input device setting on the main menu, either when you're on the track or in the main menus, and this is where you can set your overall global force feedback settings. And then there's additional force feedback options in the car setup page for each car, which will be saved for each car. We'll start with the global settings and what you need to be aware of, and then we'll go into the car settings. So, input device settings, which will apply to everything. A really big thing that you need to be aware of is the global force feedback strength, or gain as they call it here. You need to set this to 100. In many other simulators and games, you would actually set this to sort of 60 or 70 to avoid clipping. But in Project Motor Racing, I found if you set this to 100, you actually get more detail, more range, and you won't necessarily get clipping. You might get clipping if you turn it up on the in-car settings, but I think it's best to actually set this to 100 and then adjust each car when you come to adjust each car. Now, the low boost setting, which is below the global gain, this is a way to make the force feedback feel sharper when you initially turn your wheel, and makes things a bit more immediate by making the force feedback non-linear. I really don't recommend using this. It actually will give a bit of a lump to the force feedback, and though it might make things feel more responsive in some ways, is generally a bad idea, especially if you have an okay wheel. Now, this force feedback detail slider, this might be renamed in your version of the game as braking detail. This is to give more force for when you're braking and more braking feel. You put this on a really low setting. You probably don't need it with a direct drive wheel. I run it on 10 to 20. The force feedback smoothing does what it says. It will smooth the force feedback. I put this on 0, and I'd rather use smoothing from my wheelbase software. But if you don't want to use your wheelbase, you can use this smoothing setting to make things feel generally smoother. The more you increase it, the less precise and less detailed in some ways the force feedback will be. But you can use that slider if you want to make things feel generally smoother. I don't like to use it. Now, the force feedback headroom slider is supposed to make it so that jolts and bumps don't cause your wheel to go crazy. However, at this point in time, if you're running 100% on the global force, then the force feedback headroom slider doesn't seem to do anything at all. In the future, it might be the case that you could reduce or increase this to change how big jolts can come through your wheel. What I would say, though, anyway, in general, if you are worried about sudden forces and jolts with a direct drive wheel, especially high strength ones, just reduce the strength on your wheelbase or set a maximum torque output or maximum rotational speed. That's much better than relying on the simulator and video game to stop from breaking your hands. Because if the game crashes, crazy stuff can happen. So I would cap the force feedback on your wheelbase, not from the video game. Now, the haptic slider is more for high frequency vibrational effects like gear shifting, engine vibrations, and some track vibrations. True force, full force, that type of vibrational stuff. You might want to turn this on. I generally find it a bit of a gimmick, and to be honest, I think you're much better off using things like tactile transducers for these types of vibrational effects. Check out our £150 motion rig video, which shows you how to set that up really cheaply and have vibration for your ass, gear shifts, and understeering stuff for your pedals. You're much better off with haptics, with Dayton audio pucks and that kind of thing, and SimHub, than you are doing it through your steering wheel. I personally think true force and full force is really pretty bad. Some people like it though. You might as well try it, see how it feels, but you'll generally find this is really high frequency vibrational effects that really are a bit annoying once you've got pretty experience with sim racing. Also, it might be worth trying this a few times, maybe after PMR's been out for a while, because I think they'll add or take away or adjust the haptic strength settings and what goes through the haptic strength as the game develops. So keep that in mind. So now we're going to go to the vehicle setup and click on tyres and chassis, and that is where all the force feedback options for each car is saved. Keep in mind, if you download a car setup or you get a custom setup, it might also have changed force feedback. So tyres and chassis page, and you can adjust the force feedback for each car. What's the settings? Let me explain what the settings do and why you'd probably want to change what you'd want to change here, and a quickest way to set it up decent. This is very confusing. A lot of people are probably getting confused by this. And I did spend like 10 hours messing around with this to fully understand what was worthwhile doing. So, steering rack rate. This is basically the rack sensitivity. So if you turn this up, it's the steering ratio will increase. So if you want the steering of the car to be more sensitive, like if this is on 2, it's twice as sensitive. So this is a way to make the car steering faster with your input still being like 1-to-1 with the game, if that makes sense, or slower. So if you're struggling to catch a car's oversteer, and you're like going really crazy on the wheel, and you don't want to do that much work, well, you can make the steering more sensitive, and then you can just move the wheel less to catch stuff. But what you should be aware of, the more sensitive the steering, the more that's having to compress the force feedback into a smaller space. So it'll also make the force feedback stronger, and it'll also make the force feedback more abrupt. And so if you run faster steering, things will feel sharper. And if you run slower steering, things will generally feel more vague. And in some ways, you might feel more range and dynamics of the force feedback with slower steering. Having said that, I quite like to run most of the cars at 1.4 or 1.0, and you can still get decent feel. Steering stiffness. 1 is the least stiff and 10 is the stiffest, and what this just means is that when it comes to like bumps and jolts on the steering, this is sort of dampens them a little bit or makes it more harsh. To be honest, on a high-end ED wheel, 1 is still really, really harsh for the steering stiffness. I mean, sorry, 1, which is the softest, is still very harsh. 10, it will start feeling like very harsh, mostly for like rumbly stuff, track texture, that kind of thing, things that jostle the car. And then steering damping, this dampens the steering, so it's like putting a bit of damper on your wheelbase. I just leave these on 1, to be honest, but you might want to increase them if you want more damping from car to car and have it safe for the car. So that's useful to know for the steering. Now, this is the crux of the force feedback, right? For the making these cars feel really nice. Strength is basically the strength of the force feedback, like how strong it actually will push on you overall. So you can just turn this down if you want the force feedback weaker. And rather than doing it in the in-game one on that gain setting, do it per car and turn the strength down here, and you'll still get a lot of detail, but it'll just be weaker. So what I tend to do is, and it will depend on your wheelbase and how strong your wheelbase is as to how strong you want it in the game as well. Let's go through the settings before I go tell you what I actually use on them. Rack feel is basically by default at 1.0, all the force is being generated by the steering rack. So that's the tyres connect to a steering rack, and then the steering wheel has like a cog that attaches to that steering rack, and so the force feedback is often in simulators driven from the tyres putting a force on the steering rack, which you then feel through the wheel. Most games, a lot of games, generate the force feedback from the steering rack, and you can actually get a lot of detail from that. However, you can reduce the steering rack feel in order to then have other types of force feedback come through the force feedback that are based on the load, the G-force load, or other effects that the developer puts into the game. Personally, I just leave this on 1.0, but that explains the rack feel setting. Alignment boost, what this does is it magnifies aspects of how the steering rack feels, or reduces aspects of how the steering rack feels. This is a very important setting for feeling the front end losing grip and the grip going up and down, so you can feel dynamics in if you're understeering. So I'll explain why you want to set this, why you'd want to change this when I go through the settings I use. But that's basically what it does. It boosts the steering, the aspects of how the steering rack feel comes to you. Load boost allows you to control G-force type feel and other effects that are added to the simulator, to the force feedback. You'd have to turn down rack feel, and then you can change the load boost setting to then affect things. If you've got this at 1.0, the load boosting doesn't seem to do anything, but I don't use the load boost setting at all. I just leave that off. Friction just adds a flat friction to the steering wheel. I'd leave that off. If you do use friction, I'd recommend just doing it on your wheelbase. So I don't like using that. Now, low, mid and high, you can think of these settings like a hi-fi equalizer. The low setting is all the sort of forces that describe the grip of the tyre, the sort of like things you'd be pushing against and the car pushing back on you. That is what all the low forces are. Mid is like more sort of curbing, suspension bumping over the track, and those sort of details that are not like really drawn out, but like more sort of suspension-y bump stuff. And then high is like super high frequency stuff, so like very grainy feeling type force feedback. For the most part, you don't need to consider high. Like turning this from 1 to 0 won't make any difference. Right. So as for my settings and why and how I set this up and why, what I tend to do is I run the steering rack a bit fast because I don't like to be overactive on my steering wheel. Then I turn the strength down to like 60 or 70 on here. And then what I do is I turn the alignment boost up to like between 30 and 50. Let's say 40. Then what I do is I often turn down this mid and I turn up this high because you can't normally feel any of this high stuff anyway. So turn that up lets you feel something. But I turn down the mid. The reason I turn down the mid is because it seems to, with a lot of the cars, introduce like this baked in kind of damper feel, right? Like if you turn the wheel whilst you're just driving, there's always the same thing happening, which is not dynamic. So by setting things up like this, I might put a little bit on the mid, but have the EQ low at 1, mid at like 4 or off, and that at high, and then this alignment boost at 40 and this turned down. That gets you really decent feeling force feedback for like feeling what the cars are doing. You can pretty much use this with like any vehicle in the game and it will feel pretty dynamic. So what you might ask then is like, well, what do you do? So to answer common questions, the steering, it is too sensitive. Well, just turn down the steering rate rack. Too sensitive. It's not sensitive enough. Turn this up. The steering's the force feedback's too weak. Well, you can just turn this strength setting up, or it's too strong. You can turn it down. I can't feel enough of the front of the car gaining and losing grip. Well, turn the strength down a bit and turn the alignment boost up. I feel too much of the front of the car, like the force feedback's getting too light when I skid a bit on the front, and it's too like there's too much change in the force feedback going up and down, and it's too aggressive. Well, turn the alignment boost down and you'll have less of that front end feel. There's too much bumping and vibration, and it's overly like noisy. Well, just turn the EQ mid down and it will feel a lot smoother. That's about it, really. Then yeah, there you go. That basically goes through. That's pretty much all the settings you really need to be aware of. As I say, this is all done with nothing changed on my wheelbase. I'm using a Moza wheelbase, and the settings, so I'm running this R21 Ultra at 80% strength, and but we have all these, everything off here, interpolation off, damping all off, everything's off, temperature controls are radical, force feedback equalizer. I have this set like this because it actually removes some high frequency stuff, but you could turn this off as well if you wanted to. So this is basically, everything is off on the Moza, so the settings I've just explained to you in game will be the same for every single wheelbase, basically, in terms of what you use in the game to change the settings. I like to do this with the Moza. Watch my most important setting video that explains why I do this. But that is basically it. That lets you know everything with the force feedback. I would say as well, I do think it's fantastic with Project Motor Racing that you can do all this from the game. So it doesn't matter what wheelbase you've got. You don't need a wheelbase with telemetry force feedback. You can just adjust all this in the game, which is perfect. What you will also find as well, and something you need to be aware of, when you change other aspects of car setup, specifically tyre or wheel geometry, like say caster or toe or any of these car setup options, they will also affect the force feedback. So if you have more aggressive caster, that can produce more self-aligning, which will make it then harder for you to turn the wheel, or less caster and the wheel could end up being more neutral and you'll feel less force feedback. Camber, toe, a lot of these things as well can affect how the force feedback will feel, because the force feedback is the end result of the forces on the steering rack produced by the wheels. Now, I don't recommend changing the wheel geometry or these things to make the force feedback feel better. Well, in real life, they have to, because they don't necessarily have a choice. It depends on the car. But I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend changing these if you know what you're doing for car setup. There's loads of videos explaining these settings, but these settings are good to change for tyre temperature or performance, or to make the car drive and handle different or better, or in my case, make the car handle worse. But these things will affect how the car feels through the force feedback as well, so keep that in mind. But it's why it's actually a good idea for the force feedback settings to be on the car setup, because different cars, you'll want different force feedback settings, and even with different car setups, you might want different force feedback settings to make up for the other settings that you changed. It all seems very complicated, and it can be quite fiddly. But the main thing is those force feedback settings we pointed out here, the strength and the alignment boost. Turn the strength down, turn the alignment boost up a little bit, and that will get you a long way, combined with the settings in the main menu. But there you go, guys. Now, sorry that was a really boring video, but that is an overview of the main settings and why you may or may not want to set certain things. If you have some good settings that you thought were great for you and your settings, post them in the comment section so people can try them out. There are a couple of things that I personally would like and haven't really fiddled with enough to get the most out of it from this, and that I haven't managed to get. One of them is I'd really like a understeer vibration effect, similar to what you have in the original Assetto Corsa, that's basically a canned vibration for when you're pushing through understeer that increases with more understeer. I would love to have something like that. That might be an option in the future. And the other thing is, I would like things to be a bit tighter without making the force feedback non-linear. But other than that, I think the force feedback is really, really good in this. Really detailed. You should be able to feel a good amount of dynamic range. You should be able to feel the rear coming out. You should be able to feel the front losing grip. and curbing, you know, and that's all you really need from a simulator to be able to actually drive it intuitively. So there you go, guys. Hopefully you found this useful. Thank you very much for watching. Till the next one, happy tea drinking, take care, and goodbye.